Hey, Voodoo Power listeners. Before we start the show, let me tell you about Strength Coach Pro. Strength Coach Pro is the ultimate coaching companion for passionate strength coaches. Strength Coach Pro is a powerful platform allowing coaches to sequence programs for an entire year, ensuring athletes stay on track. It features a simple drag and drop design for program building. It's easy and efficient, allowing for customized workouts. Another great feature of Strength Coach Pro is the real-time leaderboard feedback. Athletes love competition, creating a fun, engaged, and motivated environment where they can thrive. Strength Coach Pro is trusted by coaches at all levels, from professional to D1, high school, and professional trainers looking for an easy way to streamline programming needs. Whether working with 10 clients or 1,000 athletes, there are no limits to the support of this program. In addition, there's a 14-day trial for coaches where they can explore the platform for themselves. At just $50 a month or $500 a year, the value is unbeatable. Please don't miss your opportunity. Coaches can reach out to Strength Coach Pro for a demo today. Let them work to save you time and elevate your coaching. Now on to the podcast.
Welcome to the Voodoo Power Podcast. Welcome to Plates and Pancakes. We're sitting down today with Tyler Rathke. Coach Rathke is the activities director at Lone Jack High School. Prior to that, he was a physical education teacher at Rogers Heritage High School in Rogers, Arkansas, where he coached track and field, specializing in the throwing events. Rathke spent 8 years at William Chrisman as the head track and field coach, and he was the assistant track and field coach for Cloud Community College in Concordia, Kansas, along with spending time at North Texas. Rathke was also involved with CoachTube.com as the VP of track and field marketing. Coach Rathke has a passion for and specializes in neurological-based practices. He holds a USATF L2 certification in throws, a Reflexive Performance Reset Level 3 certification, and a Square One System Level 2 certification. Coach Rathke has been through the Pinnacle Performance Biomechanics program, as well as Functional Movement Screen Level 1. Rathke was an All-American in the Discus at Barton Community College, and he has a bachelor's degree in exercise science from Hastings College, where he also competed in track and field, earning honors as a 3-time All-American and a school record holder. So welcome to the show, Coach.
Hey, thank you very much. I'm excited to be on it. It's an honor, and I'm glad you asked me, and I'm excited to get going.
Well, it just seems like over the last year or so, we've been bumping into each other more, talking to each other more, so it seemed like it was going to be a really good fit.
Yeah, I'm happy to be back in the area and get to know you and be closer to share ideas and see how things go.
Well, talking about sharing ideas, you just had a Twitter post. I know this will go a little bit later, so the Twitter post will be old, but you had your wrestlers getting ready for a conference tournament. They were in a dark gym, had them on the mat, working through some visualization ideas and things like that. Now, how have you seen the effectiveness of that, and how are you able to implement that with high school kids?
Sure. So first and foremost, I want to give a shout out to Ben Call, our wrestling coach at Lone Jack. This being my first year there, I've been pretty fortunate to have some elite coaches at a school our size. I think it's in part because we have a great community and supportive community, and so people enjoy and stay. And Ben's one that's been there for 10 years. We won our first conference wrestling championship yesterday, which had a lot to do with Ben and what they've already done, and very little to do with me. But I was honored to be recognized yesterday by them as an honorary coach, in part because of the support that I provide Ben through the school day to get things done and cover some classes for him. But some of the work that we've been doing, both with some of his athletes that'll experience some wear and tear, kind of lingering injury issues that I'll address throughout the season when needed, and then some of the neurological things that we approached yesterday. So to give you some backstory, Coach Call had come to me and said, hey, can you visit with the team? We're in kind of this crucial part of the season. We're looking for the next thing. If we want to take another step forward, what could you do? And I have so many different branches, I guess, that I can go with things. A lot of times I look through the lens of pain and injury when I'm addressing stuff, but this was a different approach. Another main tree of mine would be maximizing performance and finding the inputs sensory and neural wise that drive those outputs to be larger. And so this was a unique approach. He was wanting more visualization type things, and they do so much of that already. So in part, mine was about there was a multi-step process that day, and we can dive into that more if you want. But essentially in that picture, I put Wim Hof breathing at the entry level. So Wim Hof is the Iceman that has surpassed all these amazing accomplishments that most humans couldn't through his processing of information, essentially uh, tricking, quote unquote, his body into believing that what's happening is not actually happening, and therefore controlling some of the internal processes to correspond to that, which is amazing. So um, back at William Chrisman, we would use Wim Hof kind of in the middle of our week. We had a modified block schedule. So I'd train a Monday, Tuesday, and then I have a 90-minute session right in the middle of the week, followed by another short one on Friday. And so we would grind pretty hard. Some classes would be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday with their longest session on the third day. And I would usually come back with the Wim Hof breathing at the end of that session. So this is just a 10-minute starter course with a 30-second breath hold, a 60-second breath hold, and a 90-second breath hold. I really like breath hold work for more endurance-y type athletes. And if you look at wrestling, I guess over the course of a brutal match for 6 minutes plus with an overtime, there is some of that. I look at it for like 400-meter runners, 800-meter runners, cross-country runners, just being able to be comfortable with different breathing situations that you incur. But again, getting too far away from what we're talking about, what they were doing was a Wim Hof breathing. We had went through some neural inputs and showed them the maximization of performance through the result of flexibility improvements just before we did that. We looked at some visual stuff. We talked about the simplicity of understanding how to breathe correctly. And most of the wrestlers, to my surprise, because of the stress they incur a lot of times with high stressed athletes or really physical, gritty, like I'm going to dig for this, like they'll come into this compensation pattern of chest breathing and not understand how to find the diaphragm through the breath. But our wrestlers were really, really good. And again, that goes back to what Coach Call and staff have been doing with them. But basically, we went over the function of the breathing. We just, place hands in certain areas and look to expand the diaphragm and get good movement there. And then I put them into the Wim Hof system there for 10 minutes, essentially, and then used the visualization rehearsal of things that they had already worked on through the breath holds. Like, so when you get uncomfortable and you feel like taking a breath, finding something to lean into that is familiar and is something that you want to accomplish can take away the need to feel stressed and need to breathe through those. So as they got harder, they would look for that, visualization of a move that they use or them on a state podium, or like in this situation was the day before the conference championship. So I was really excited to get to do it with them. I've, kind of eased into this AD role, not wanting to, come at anybody and force myself upon their program and what they do. But I've been very grateful for those that have asked me to come in and do some specific work. And eventually it'll get to the point where everyone will get to know me and some of the things that I do and enjoy to do. But yeah, so that was really fun. And I was really excited to see both boys and girls win the conference championship yesterday. That was a big deal. First one in school history.
It's nice to have a coach on that's local and that I've been able to watch their athletes perform. We ran into each other a couple weeks ago down at the Butler tournament. I had a couple kids from the gym down there wrestling. And yeah, your wrestlers looked really good. They looked prepared. They wrestled well. As far as your coach, I know he came to Adrian last year and helped put on the conference tournament, helped me figure out how to run flow wrestling on the computer. And then I was able to keep stats and all that stuff throughout the course of the meet. So yes, there's kind of been an intertwine between Adrian and Lone Jack the last few years. But yeah, your wrestlers looked amazing. They looked prepared. So I can only imagine that the conference championship went pretty good for them.
Absolutely.
Now, you've worked in some incredibly big schools. William Chrisman, that's a pretty good sized school. And then down in Arkansas, Rogers Heritage, that's a good sized school. You come back to a very small school, tight knit community. What challenges has that posed, but also what benefits has that posed?
Yeah. Initial challenges is just the budgetary aspect of things. There's a much smaller budget when you look at the operations side of teams and such. a challenge that is perceived by the community is that the same people always do all the work and do all the things, and that certain people don't want to do anything. Um, I, 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 I don't see that. I've made it my impact, trying to make my impact focus on those two perceived negatives or realities with smaller budgets and limited individuals to do the work in a smaller community. I've found support tremendously from families and alumni uh, in different sports, and we've maximized our budgets through that practice. So the thing about me in any situation I go into, I don't feel like there's anything that's not possible. If a coach is willing to put in the work towards something, I feel like it can be accomplished no matter the cost or the amount of time that would be associated with it within reason. And so a lot of times you get discouraged in a smaller community. Oh, we can't do this, we can't do that, we could never afford that, or we don't have these nice things. But if you just continue to pursue this idea relentlessly with a good team around you and a village of support, like it'll eventually get done. We've done a lot of really good things, kind of more in the athletic director realm. We were on a uniform rotation with some of our booster club things, and through in-kind donations and hosting events that produce income and doing more service-based type fundraising where it's not like, hey, will you buy this, but you're going out and doing and then being compensated for the doing part. We've been able to replace, I would say 75% of our team's uniforms going into next year, like completely across the spectrum in middle school and high school. So those challenges have been met head on that existed. The biggest challenge that I see is overcoming some local issues that have damaged trust in terms of student athletes' willingness to really, really, really work in the weight room, both in season and out of season. Whether you look at female athletes who have felt like programming has been pushed towards a football ideology, which I put in air quotes because, I do think there are a lot of good things that came from those programs, but it was the relation of why we are doing it and how, and differentiation slightly throughout it that would have built trust towards that. So right now, the biggest thing is regaining the community's trust in a intelligently put together program that will benefit all athletes, regardless of sport, and trying to get everybody to unify in that. We've got great success in all these different programs, but a lot of it is done in different places. So soccer was training at a facility called Z Sports all summer. Wrestling was training at a practice facility that they use off campus. Football was really the only one in the summer that was on campus. So trying to bring every single individual back to campus this summer, break the walls of sport and get everyone pushing towards the same goal, I think will only help every program in our school, and then maybe have a few kids that will sprinkle into other sports that hadn't because of the relationships that they'll build within those groups. So that's a big challenge. Our space certainly wasn't conducive to a large group, and so I understood those realities and challenges. We're working on potentially expanding in the near future into a new location. But immediately what I did was I took all of the crap, for lack of a better word, out of the weight room, especially in the spaces that you flow and can do movements. So took everything out of the middle, repainted all of the racks with a local company, took all of the accessory pieces off and painted those myself, laid some leftover turf from our turf project on the field into the weight room just to provide a different surface that was a little bit softer and more aesthetically pleasing than the blue floor that was just like a single piece of really, really hard plastic. So those are the things initially just to build excitement, because I know, again, the perception was that space wasn't, a place that girls particularly and some gentlemen didn't really want to go in. It was rusty, it was dirty, it was grungy, and there was a large liability risk of injury in my eyes. So we got that all cleaned out and ready to go. So biggest challenge and hurdle for me right now is implementing a big program shift in the summer and then trickling that into the school year. This current school year, we have 3 strength conditioning classes, 6 through 12, offered in a 7-period day. Next year, we have flopped and flipped our PE offerings with our strength conditioning offerings. So we will offer 6 of 7 classes next year. And again, my hope and vision is to push and get this where I want it, using the summer as a time where everyone's available, and rolling that into an enrolled in-season program throughout the school day. So that's something that we've been missing. The strength of a small community, in comparison to 2,100 students at Rogers Heritage and 1,400 at William Chrisman, that there is more community support even in a small community. Like if you just took it per person, it's crazy to say that, and people will think I'm crazy, but until you've been in some of those situations, depending on what type you were William Chrisman was a Title I eligible school with 75% or greater free and reduced lunch. Rogers Heritage was 2,100 students. 1,200 of those students were non-English primary language speakers. So there was a disconnect culturally and language from about half of our community. So if you just look at the number of people that are involved in Lone Jack, it's a small number, but it's not too much different than what I had experienced at a William Chrisman or a Rogers Heritage, where the same people are always doing a lot of the work and they feel, like they are. So I try to relay that message, and the folks in Lone Jack sometimes think I'm absolutely crazy and they don't believe me, but I'm just telling you, I've spent a lot of time. I've got a lot of friends in this, scope of different types of schools, and I feel really good about what we have from a community support standpoint. So getting them involved, doing things right, hosting really quality events, and being proud of the school continuing to expand and put resources into facilities is only going to continue to build the trust and the excitement around those activities. So that's one of the main things. But last point on Lone Jack, as Adrian might be as well, just for more demographic information, Lone Jack's about 9% free and reduced lunch. So we're super low for a rural school because we are so close to Lee Summit. So it's just a completely different demographic. But if like right now, I'm on an old computer. My backpack is sitting at the high school still. There's a youth wrestling tournament going on today, and I have absolutely no worry. If I leave my phone in the lunchroom, which has all my credit cards in it, like I have no worry. I just come back a couple hours later, it's sitting there. So it's a unicorn in a lot of ways. I don't know that that's possible in today's world, and a lot of different facilities and buildings and places that you would have those situations. So I'm certainly fortunate to serve as an athletic director, activities director only position at a school our size with the demographics and the type of kids that we have.
Yeah, it's just a different world if you've never experienced it. And it's generational families that come through, and their dads played there, their moms played there, they met in high school. That's the legacies are tied to family heritage, I guess. So it just keeps, the culture can keep building in a really positive way. As I was going through your stuff, I noticed that you took over Chrisman's track program at 23. That is looking back at where I was at 23, I don't know that I was anywhere near being prepared to take over a big program like that, getting it in the direction it needed to go, setting up meets, everything involved. How were you able to take that program, turn it into what you did, and not get caught up in a 23-year-old's mind?
Yeah. Man, there's layers to all these paths and journeys that you go on. I certainly go back to some of the coaches that I had in high school, back in Hayes High, and the success we had kind of at the tail end of my career. We actually won a team championship my senior year in track with a brand new coach that year, and that individual is still very impactful in my life. He's head football coach at Republic High School here in Missouri now. But then I look at like my freshman year in college, random roommate at Barton County Community College, sprinter from Montezuma, Georgia, and I walk into the room. We, on the surface level, have nothing in common. But throughout the course of the year, we would run 4 days of morning practice at Barton County all through the fall and most of indoor season. And so we'd have to be up and training by 6, and just the discipline that I was immediately met with beyond the good upbringing and community that I was raised in, but then getting this individual, his name was Jeremy Hardy. He was enlisted in like the Naval Academy right out of high school, and then at 21 decided he wanted to go to college, and so he got a walk-on opportunity at Barton County. He was running 11-1 in the 100 at the time, and so this is my roommate as a freshman, and uh, he would eat right. He was a little different body type because I was a thrower and he's a sprinter, but he would eat right. We'd be in bed, lights off, 9 o'clock. We'd get up early, go to practice. We'd go eat breakfast every single day. We'd always go to class. Like there was just, it was a model, right, where you could get in a situation as a freshman right off the bat and make some poor choices or not be disciplined. I had the ultimate disciplinarian and good friend right off the bat, and had no idea that I would be so fortunate. So that Jeremy instilled a lot of things like that in me, and I knew that I wanted to be a coach based on the impact coaches had had on me, probably at the end of my senior year into the early parts of college. And so if you go back a little bit before the 23-year-old high school head coaching role, at 21, I did a strength conditioning internship at the University of North Texas. Um, so Frank Wintrick was the director of football performance at that time. Frank was a military guy, super, super good opportunity for me at 21 just to see the discipline and the structure. We we were up at 4 a.m. every day there, all summer long, basically spent there. But 21, coming down from a Nebraska university, know a little bit about strength conditioning, not a ton, just getting thrown into the fire. And Frank said, like, if I'm putting you on the floor, you're going to coach. This isn't some place where you're just wiping benches as an intern you know, spotting. He's like, you're going to coach. He's like, you have to. And so I had the opportunity then to just be thrown into it. Again, had a great group of people around me there that modeled that behavior as well. You know, I was 21. I had interns that were 30. Great friends. That guy from Vancouver, director of strength conditioning at Morgan State. He was with us. He was much older than me. So I had a bunch of older people around me. So again, modeling behavior and just coaching, being forced into that role, that was great for me. And then coming out of school then at 22, I was looking at opportunities to either continue my education. Southwest Baptist offered me a Division II throws GA position, or I could go make $6,000 and be the assistant track coach at Cloud County. And when I looked at the personnel, I saw a lot more talent at Cloud and the ability to build something. You know, and not be like GA for 2 years and be done. I thought it was odd that I would have to recruit kids, only being able to guarantee the 2 years. So I went with Cloud. I lived on campus, made $6,000. You know, 6,000 compared to what I make now. I felt like I had more money sometimes back then, as crazy as that sounds. But again, I'm 22 years old. I have kids on the Cloud County track team that are older than me. You know, there's there's little things that I think are important that are probably not necessarily like long conversations for this podcast, but the way you handle yourself, the way that you dress, the way that you approach things, the confidence that you carry yourself with. Most of the kids on the team did not know that I was 22 years old. They didn't know that I was older, and I'm not going to tell you. And I'm going to wear a collared shirt every day, and I'm going to wear khaki pants every day, and I'm going to carry a briefcase, not a book bag. Like little stuff, like look the part, be the part, have confidence enough to say like, I don't know, but I'm going to find out, because you're connected and you can find things in ways to do it. But other than that, like be confident in what you're doing, because if you exude anything that's other than confidence, like you're going to get eaten alive. And that's, I think, the mistake too many people make is they want to build trust and they want to be a leader by befriending people and things like that. No, we're here to do a job, and I'm confident and I'm the leader. And if you exude those behaviors, no one will ever assume that you're young and you can't do the job. So when I was 23 and I got the head coaching opportunity, honestly, like you mentioned, the hardest part was not not knowing what I didn't know that I was getting myself into with hosting meets and different things. But again, the approach was, hey, who are the best individuals in this realm that I'm in? Joe Cusack at Blue Springs, Ken Peak was at Belton at the time when I first got there. Those individuals were killing it. Their meets were awesome. So just observe, what are they doing really well, and then mimic it. And so when you talk about like something that I didn't really have a lot of experience with at first, meet hosting, we had a varsity meet, four teams, I think, two JVs and two local schools. And I was like, this is unacceptable. Like, these people sent their JV. See, I had no idea that they were going to send their JV to our meet. So behind everything that I've mentioned, like, passion is extremely important, and it can be taken wrong in some circumstances. But I believe if you're passionate about what you're doing and what you want, and you have these goals behind it, like, you're gonna figure it out at 23. Like, I'm sure I made mistakes. I had never taught in a classroom. I had never studied education in an undergrad setting. I was an exercise science major. I had no student teaching. I was on a temporary cert. I was taking 12 credit hours in my first year of teaching to get the temporary cert, ratified by the state to be a full-time certified teacher. I coached three sports and did fall weight room, did all the summer conditioning. Like, just grind and survive. Like, truly, just get through it in the best way possible when you're backing it with passion, and you're not afraid to say that you don't know and ask others. Like, you're going to get through it, and then you just build more confidence and more experience. And just a quick reference, like that track meet with four teams when I first started, 7 years later, it was on live television, and had over 42 schools with 5 states represented. So it wasn't because I tried to reinvent the wheel. I looked at what great teams did. I had some interesting ideas that came from passion that excited the track community, that got more teams there. But then you just build something really well, and then people just continue to support it and come back. So I don't know, man, process oriented, but if you come into it like without a vision of the process, and you don't know what you want, and you really aren't super passionate about impacting young people and being a coach and being great at what you do, then I can see why you might struggle at that age. But if you have the right mindset behind it, and you're all in, and you're doing whatever you can to be great, and whatever it takes, you'll be fine. You'll survive. Everybody does. Um, Everybody does that has the right intentions.
So building onto that just a little bit, you were a 3-time state champion, 4-time all-state honoree, 4-time All-American. How did how were you able to keep your accolades and ego at somewhat of a distance from athletes? So it wasn't every conversation was, well, when I did it, or,
Mm.
I was all-state. There's a somewhat of a check and balance in there that the kids actually want to hear about and care about before you start pushing on them too hard. How were you able to find that balance?
Yeah, um we actually run into some of these type of things, where I'm at, where we'll maybe have a coach from a bigger school, and they'll get a job at Lone Jack, and they'll say, well, like, at blank, our kids never did this. Well, that doesn't motivate people. I think success in a sport like track and field that isn't individualistic, like when I was coaching throwers early on, my ability to relate experiences that I had that led to my success from a technical model standpoint, like, it was easy buy-in. And so I would almost say, like, it's harder to build buy-in when you haven't done something, or you're not doing, like, if you're looking at training, if you've never done the thing that you're telling this kid to do, like, how can you explain that and have see that as being successful? So, but like, in the same breath, like you said, like, I am humbled by the things that I've accomplished and experienced, but I certainly don't really tell people about that a lot, like in conversation. You'd have to really get to know me or listen to a podcast that I was on, maybe if it got brought up, to ever know that about me. I don't think it holds a lot of weight to kids. I can think about back when I was in high school, and a coach would come in and say, back in the 80s, we won the state championship at. It doesn't relate. Like, kids don't value that, and maybe they should, but I don't think that's the ticket in the door, to building that relationship and trust with that individual. So, man, I don't know. It's just, I was able to demonstrate a lot of things early on, and I still feel pretty good at 33, like almost 33, to be able to demonstrate pretty much any movement. And that certainly helps. But as far as just touting a resume that included some success, I've never leaned on that.
Becoming a more well-rounded coach, you are obviously a throws guy, but now you're taking over a big program. You've got to learn how to work with sprinters and jumpers. You have to become a complete package. How were you able to adapt and become a better coach at some events that maybe you didn't have a lot of knowledge in?
Yeah. Chrisman, I was pretty fortunate with some connections in the track world. We were able to pretty much specialize in a lot of events over the course of most of my years. One of the first times where I felt like I really was needed across a spectrum of events was at Rogers Heritage. And so at one time last year with a much longer season, I was coaching horizontal jumps, short sprints, sprint relays, and then the shot in the disc since the javelin doesn't exist in Arkansas. So what I would say from a learning aspect is identify first the similarities in the events. So like in our preseason in Arkansas, which is a full athletic period state. So we were doing stuff in the fall. Sprinters, throwers, and jumpers were all training together. A lot of the things looked the same because of the power demands and the commonalities between those events. And then I think, this is again is a longer season in Arkansas. But one of the things that I went back to, I guess, not feeling so rushed was just identifying some really simplistic daily drill type things, or really honing in on some systems like with the sprint relays, like a series of drills and preps that they knew that they had been taught. And so why this is relevant is if I have to navigate multiple groups, um, their ability to effectively do some of those routines without me having to stand over them allows me flexibility to move around and maybe refine or introduce a new concept to one of the other groups. So I guess that's more of a managing groups scenario. But when you look at, with my background in exercise science and strength conditioning, like when you look at those movements, there are a lot of similarities. Javelin, long jump, triple jump, and sprints are more similar than people give them credit when you look at the runway aspect of those sports and the rhythmic nature of them. So, yeah, but again, like if you're trying to learn, like if you truly have no idea, or maybe you came from a physical education background and maybe didn't get as detailed into some of those things, USATF has a great level 1 program that will cover the basics of all. I think one of the mistakes I've made is like when you look at some of those programs, again, kind of connecting to those daily drills and those simple things that we did a lot of in Arkansas. One of the things I made a mistake of was I would look at a basic program given in a USATF level 1 for jumps. And I would say, that's just too rudiment. That's just too. There is a time aspect in the state of Missouri and Kansas and some of these shorter sports seasons where you don't have a lot of time to implement a GPP or an off-season phase. There's just not. In a small school like ours, our kids are playing all 3 sports and they're working and they're doing all these things. But again, I would say that was a mistake on my part, like thinking that certain things were too elementary, too rudiment, and that I couldn't do those, thinking kids would get bored, thinking that they didn't have value beyond a few days of introduction. So I think there's really good take homes in my experiences with just hammering the basics, and when it's coming from a really good source, like trusting that program and some of the tools within it are going to be beneficial to your athletes, and not trying to say like, well, then what do we do? How do I make this more complex? I think the basics will go a long way for those kids. So USATF level 1, Altus, getting into the room. I hosted some pretty cool events on CoachTube. Hosted a big jumping symposium. I think you get in there for $50 and watch some of the best people in the world. So I think you have to seek out education and be willing. And I think when you go into the education opportunities, a mistake I see coaches make all the time when I go to clinics, you know, going to the clinic doesn't give you, the answers like automatically. It's just because you're there doesn't mean you become a better coach because you're sitting in the room as someone that's very successful speaks. Again, retracing back to some of my influential people in my life. When I was in college, you always, like some of my college impacted leaders and coaches, when you went to listen to somebody, regardless if it was class or a presentation, you brought a notepad and a pencil and you sat in the front two rows. And I can't tell you the number of coaches in education that want to sit in the back row or don't show up with a binder and a piece of paper. And I just think like if I as an admin athletic director want to provide educational opportunities, you better be able to tell me what you got out of that and how you're going to apply it. And it doesn't have to be a journal of 300 pages, but when you don't come to the table prepared, like you're probably not gonna take home as much as you should or could. So I'd say when you seek out those educational opportunities, like take notes, write everything down. Like that's the best way of learning that I've found. I just write, go back and read it, look through it. How can you apply it? What can you do with it? Those are some of the key things I think when you're trying to take on events that you haven't coached before. I think everybody is able to coach effectively right away with the right influences and mindset. And I think you're 3 to 5 years away from being really good at coaching something. Like I really do. I've seen it personally through some of my assistant coaches that maybe hadn't coached something. 3 to 5 years, and you can be one of the best at the high school level in your state, 100%. If you get in the right rooms and you put time into it. So it's attainable for anyone that has the right attitude and mindset for sure.
Well, building on to what you just said there, so I was not prepared for throwers when I kind of started this little gym, and it seems like we've had a huge influx in with them. I've gotten very lucky. Some of them have private coaches to help with technique, so I don't mess with any of that. But some of them don't, and they need help. So I've had to start searching out these rabbit holes and trying to find little things I can do to help them improve. And I might be off on this, and I was going to get your opinion, but as I watched the javelin and I watched shot put more, to me, a javelin reminds me of being a baseball pitcher, and a shot putter is more like a hitter. So I can relate that back to baseball and work on some of those things to help them. Is that have relevance, I guess?
I've never necessarily utilized that as a cue, but I can understand what you're saying. I think javelin and shot put, if you're talking glide, are very, very similar. We had a girl very capable a couple years ago who's throwing at Emporia State. She was the MIAA conference champion as a freshman, threw just under 50 feet. She was a good javelin thrower as well. And when I would introduce Discus, because we had like city championships and things where she was totally wired enough to score points. Anyway, I felt like the rotational elements of that were going to completely ruin what we were working on with her glide shot put and javelin. And sure enough, like the day we started throwing, and I was like, okay, we're done. Like, what's the point? Like we have state goals. So I think to answer the question and kind of look at it, like, is the understanding of the athlete is something clicking using that, or is it not? I think that's the number one thing you got to ask yourself with cueing. With cueing, and I don't know if you were really relating it to cueing, but with cueing, if I have the best cues, if I've spent 10 years looking at cues and I keep telling this kid over and over and over again to do this, like it's probably time to search for something that is silly or different or something I never thought I would say. Like I can't tell you as a young coach how many times I thought that eventually they would just get it because this cue was such a great cue and this was such a great visualization tool. So, uh, yeah, I think I think if you're looking at that example from a cueing standpoint, I think there's value. If you're looking at it through training, I would say the same as well. Like if you look at an Aaron Judge body type and the amount of power he generates on big swings, like, yeah, the shot put's going to require maybe more of that. But javelin and pitchers, they have a lot of similarities in the way that they train for sure. With the mobility aspects in the upper body and the positions and the whip that they create into a lighter implement as opposed to swinging a heavier bat. So yeah, I think anything has value, and I hope I answered that all right.
Oh, I think you did. And I just wanted to hit on that before I moved into a few other things that I had wrote down here. But we have talked about this before, and I don't really know where I fall on it. But you get into that neurological rabbit hole, and it gets really, really deep. I know you spent a lot of time going down different trails and looking at different avenues of how a neurological response can help athletes. How are you able to keep that in balance with everything else you're doing? Because that can overwhelm you really fast when you're trying to figure out some of those aspects.
100%. So I will agree with that a lot. And I can kind of share the simplification of my processes. But basically, I got into the neurological side of things in 2018, if you will. I had been out of school for 4 years, suffered a back injury on a heavy, strapped up, awfully technical hang clean that was egotistical in its intention of the big pole. So I had been living essentially with back pain on one side of my spine for 4 years, and I had been coaching and still waking up with this subtle pain in my lower back. No one could really give me an answer and such. So that's what got me into the world. When my back pain went away, like I was bought in, and I started to get into the room with other people that were utilizing it more for performance and less for the rehabilitation side, or they were using both, but I was finding these other people in the performance side. And so I started to see the way that tissue movement would change with neurological implications. And I started to form this ideology that even if the worst rumors were true, even if it was a trick, even if it was temporary, like the bang for the buck that I was seeing through the assessments was worth it. If the intervention or the input of this activity takes 3 seconds and it lasts for 10, but during that 10 seconds, like my nervous system is so ramped up or my performance ability is so much higher, and I get done with a long jump or a shot put throw, and I come out and I have to perform another 3 second input, like why would I not do that? That was my approach at the very beginning. And so at the beginning, I played a lot of experimentation. I had large populations and demographic varieties to throw different inputs at. And so, um, it started with just reflexive performance reset. And then, so that's a level 1 neuromuscular activation. Most people are familiar with it. It's very publicly widespread, and you can find that information kind of on YouTube and stuff. There's a lot of information, obviously, about it. But then on the level 2 side, there was a lot of testing around, again, this is an improper use of an anatomical term, but I call like the hips. I think of the hips being proximal and being like the center of, or near the center of mass. So I think they're super important in gait and human movement. And so level 2 looks at what I would consider most proximal in the human body. Again, that's not a proper term, so please take it for what it's worth. But level 2 was a hip extension and a hip flexion assessment with psoas and glute test. And so I started to test that. This was early in 2018, 2019. So I would look at when I would test psoas and glute, if the kid had dysfunction or compensation, was that correlated with a side of their body that had experienced injury? And I was finding a lot of correspondence there. And so in most of those situations, the athlete needed me they were in the injured state and they were looking for some solution. And I was just digging deeper to find answers. And all I could think at that time early in the process was, what if I could just test everybody on this table bound psoas and glute test? And then if they had a compensation and I could catch it early enough, like we could prevent the injuries from happening. Because I was finding huge correspondence of, okay, left glute dysfunction, left ankle problem, left glute dysfunction, left shoulder. I was finding a lot of same-sided ipsilateral stuff that was being affected. Not always. And so then shortly thereafter, I was told by Chris Corfus, like, stop trying to put things in a box and stop trying to organize, like, hey, if they have a left ankle problem, it's a, so stop trying to correspond or correlate all these things. So then I moved on, and then I started getting into Dan Fichter, again, which is the performance application side. So we were looking at everything on the sensory input. So we were looking at the eyes, the vestibular system, the somatosensory system. And so then I was getting these tools. And around that time, we had just bought our first Just Jump mat. And so I was going jump, back of the line, 30 kids at a time, jump, back of the line, sensory input, you pick whatever I had seen from Dan. I was working with Track and Football Consortium at the time, and soon after with Coach Tube. So I had access personally to basically anything ever spoke or discussed on the topic. And I was able to, through note taking, a lot of times really smart people will say a name of a practitioner and just move right on. And they won't say, like, they'll say, like, yes, this, da 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 da, and then they'll move right on. And if you don't write it down and then do a deeper dive on that, you will never understand why they mentioned that. So I started doing that really a lot with Dan when he was talking about eyes, and when he was talking about saccades and smooth pursuits and different things like that. I wasn't understanding, and I wasn't understanding the cranial nerve part. So I would just start these deep dives on these other pathways. But back to the jump mat, we would jump back of the line. I would record that jump. We would come up, we would do one of those sensory inputs, and we would jump again. And if there was a large population improvement with that input, I valued it immediately. And then we would test it again and make sure that it would hold. So like when I look at sensory inputs, the big thing for me is, was it making an impact on the whole population? And the ones that were around 90% of a huge data set of people, not just athletes. I mean, like anybody. And so what became frustrating was there would be individuals that were not improving. Like they're still 10%, right? Like, and I know that, I think most people would take a 90% improvement, and I think that's fine, but like there's still 10% that's not. And why were they not improving on this thing everybody else did? Well, I guess let me finish this idea before I kind of keep sharing some other things. But what I found was, like, so with RPR and with sensory inputs and understanding of those patterns, what I was still hitting was a blockade on some people, both in the injury rehabilitation side and just the maximizing performance with data collection. And so that's when I got into Square One. And what Square One kind of told me was, like, hey, like, even if it's the best input, like the brain may still not perceive it as a great input. And so, like, I was blaming the athlete. I was like, your intent is bad. Like, you're not doing it the way I said. You're not giving it, the same, intent of your teammates. And that's why you're not getting it. But then what I started to realize was, I think every input is great, but there may be an individual that perceives that input still as a threat because it's driving home a further compensatory idea that the brain holds or stores. And so essentially, Square One completed a feedback loop for me. So if I feed somebody something that's going to improve performance through the data collection that I've had, and I want to ensure that happens, then I will reset. So I will feed the input and then clear it with Square One. So I'm pretty sure this has also been shared on Square One. So I'm just going to say it, but double tragus squeeze to me is the thing that completed my feedback loop. So if I give you one of my favorites, palm of the forehead, which is a VCR, a vestibulocollic reflex, a global flexion potentiator, which is a huge impact on my vertical jump assessments. If I give you that and I test your vertical jump and it's bad, then I'm going to come back and I'm going to give you that, and then I'm going to double squeeze. And that's my way of telling the brain to take that pattern and utilize it. So the tragus is like the completion of my loop. So I have the foundation of RPR, an assessment of the kind of muscular and skeletal function, and then I have the inputs that should improve performance. And if I'm looking at performance or injury and I'm not getting somewhere, then I can use square one. So simplistically, the tragus squeeze, the double squeeze, or then I can use the mapping. So they have in their level one, which I think is kind of crazy. I think he's changed it a little bit, but it's a skeletal mapping looking at force and the acceptance of force in different places in the body. And then if the forces are not being accepted neurologically, then you clear that place. And then essentially you'll see impacts down the chain or up the chain. So quick example to maybe make that a little more clear. Suburban White Conference Player of the Year last year, Leo Gaiman, as a junior, was having foot pain. He had previously broken the foot. Through square one, level one, when I took it, the mapping and looking at acceptance of force and compensation, we were finding force intolerance, if you will, within his thoracic spine. So when we would rewire the acceptance of force in the thoracic spine, the foot would stop hurting. So it's a deep rabbit hole, as you said. And so if I may, then you can tell me if you want to go down this rabbit hole. Basically, what I found myself in at my tail end of my career at William Chrisman, so 2023, not that long ago, was I was so far away from the majority of things that had the biggest impact. Like what I told wrestling the other day is this is the 1%. Like the other teams you're wrestling may have everything the same. They may have the great technical coaching, they may have the training, they may have the process and the understanding of what they're doing. They may have the visualization, they may have all the resources, but they're not going to have this. I'm giving you 1%. So what I found, like what I eventually had to humble myself was like there's still 99% over here that I have to be really, really good at. And the farther you get away from that bread and butter, if you will, like you're damaging that. And that's still a humongous impact in what you should be focused on. So what I did was I just took kind of over the course of that process, moving to another state, assuming a new role where that wasn't going to be like the first thing I introduced myself as, kind of like at Lone Jack. So I was able to just say, hey, what are the things that impact the most? And what is it that I can add to what I already do, my 99%, my bread and butter, that will impact that the most? So I basically refined it down to essentially, depending on the environment or the team or the modality or whatever we're doing, it can be anywhere from 45 seconds to 2 minutes. And I just put it right at the beginning. And with the tragus, I can add the tragus in at any point in a workout to create drive towards the parasympathetic and a more exact understanding of what we want the body to do, increase stability, things like that. So the double tragus is there anytime because it takes that long. But the system at the beginning, 45 to 2 minutes, 45 seconds, 2 minutes. So,
Well, as you were talking through there, you kind of touched on the next question I was going to ask is when you're working with athletes, there's a lot of ground you got to cover and you've got to find that balance. You can't give up on the things in the weight room that drives it, the technical aspects that drives it, and then neurological. So when was the aha moment that the balance had to incur and you had to find a way to make it all work together?
so at William Chrisman in the weights class, I had a pretty extensive menu of neurological things that I had picked up, and I'd seen value in them in these isolated settings. I'd be like, man, that is crazy what that just did. Like, we've got to do that. So I was adding all these things, and we would get through, I don't know, man. And this was on the longer, that 90-minute modified block. We'd get the long one, and I would add add a bunch of things. And my goal was to provide tools. See, this is prior to square one, potentially, if I have my timeline right. So my goal was to give this bag of goodies to you, and then you find the ones that work for you, because your nervous system's going to accept something that the guy next to you won't if I don't know how to clear that out. So I give you everything that you want, and whatever works for you, you keep, and the rest you throw away. So I'm going to introduce all these new things throughout the course of the semester on these long days. Take and use what you want. Well, what I was finding was, and it's an interesting demographic. So to take it for what it's worth, I just felt like I could see intent dwindling, and I could see fatigue just like mentally through the whole stuff. And I'm like, and then I didn't see all the students, like, even with a huge change, maintaining it and using it. The best athletes I've ever worked with, the most disciplined, the most successful, if I've shown them something like that, they've utilized it, right? So population drives that a lot. But there was a moment where we had a very diverse menu of visual inputs that we were doing. So we started doing that and then trying to clear some of those out. And I'm watching these kids from all these different scopes of our school trying to do this. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, what am I doing? Like, these kids just want to bench. Like, they just want to go bench, man. Like, they don't care. Like 99% of them, again, probably don't care. And so it just became like, it became, it had so much value to me because it had changed the way that I moved and felt, that I just kept pursuing more, more, more. There's got to be more. There's got to be better. There's got to be an additional resource that I can add to it. And I just got so far away from, you know, where I'm at now. And so yeah, that was the moment, and it was humbling. I was just like, I gotta stop. What are the few things I can do? So at that moment, I created like a little menu. So some of my real bought in kids in that capacity, like on a game day, if we had the 90-minute session, like I'd give them the menu and they could like go through because we'd done them all. But outside of that, we were done. Like, I was done with the visual stuff. Kids were goofing around, like they weren't executing it. It was like, it was just time to move on. So yeah, I love where I'm at now. I'm happy with where I'm at now. Made an impact in Northwest Arkansas. Lots of coaches that saw kind of what our kids were doing have reached out and asked, and want to know, like, more. And that's the thing. Like, I've been through that whole journey, right? Of like, whoa, and then too much and pulled back, and then essentialized and ran the data on all of it through the performance tests, whether it's, I told the wrestlers the other day, we did it with flexibility as the output. So we did a toe touch, but you could do a 10-yard fly, you could do a vertical jump, you could do a velocity based test with a barbell or something like that. And that's the thing that I felt like I had a lot of value and data collected over the course of those years in. And so, yeah, we've refined it down, and I'd be happy to share with you what that looks like if you want. It won't take me very long. So,
Well, I know I have quite a few coaches that listen to it, and they're probably all in the same boat we are. Like, how far do you go? And you can only do what your population will allow. And I think there's some maturity in understanding that. And I think you hit on that really well. You can have the best exercise in the world, but if you can't get them to do it, you're just spinning your wheels.
sure.
So what did you do to get that down to a very streamlined system that kept kids bought in and moving in the direction you wanted?
100%. So, for me, the number one most simple, accessible output test that doesn't require a lot of effort or energy is the mobility toe touch. Okay. grain of salt. And if anybody has an idea and they're listening and they want to share this with me, the female athletes tend to be more mobile. So the toe touch may not have as much value, but here's where the nuance and the coaching aspect comes into it. So here's what we did with wrestling just the other day. So everybody spread out, look at me, reach down, touch your toes. I want you to note how it feels and how far you're going. And if you're touching your toes, I want you to try to get your palm on the ground and see how much of your finger touched the ground. So I can still, even though I'm not chasing unlimited mobility, I need an assessment. I need a pre-assessment to then show what happens on the post. I think it's very important because kids are going to be wowed by the increase in mobility, but it's important to remind them that this mobility is an output. I'm changing. Your brain is letting you do this. So if your brain is unlocking this in this little test, imagine what it could do for you here, and again, as you build more, once you build the buy-in with the toe touch, you can start to look at it in other stuff, right? If you have a just jump mat, or you have a velocity tool for your barbell, like, do what you're already doing, mix in some of those things and show them in the other way. It's gonna make the impact. Like, I promise you, it will make the impact on the simplicity of the stuff that we do. So there has to be a pre-test. There has to be something that the athlete experiences a change. We want to feel something before we buy in. And the reality of it is, let's say someone doesn't execute, or let's say there is a threat in the room. Like, I love it's toe touch pre, input, retest toe touch. Like, if you do toe touch and then you do all of your inputs and you go back to the toe touch, yes, there'll be improvement, but the athlete won't necessarily know what was the real kicker. And like I said, I think with what I have, it's the most essential, and you're going to see a lot. And I'll touch on the why with some of those things here shortly. But so I go, pre, input, sensory input, redo, sensory input, redo, sensory input, redo, and they're just improving mobility. And then I like to say, if you're doing this for the first time, hey, how many of you improved after that one? And if I'm like this kid that's like, this is stupid, like, I don't want to do this, what are we doing? If I see like 90% of my partner's hands, I'm like going to bring more intent on the next thing, right? So, real quick point. The other reason that I'm where I'm at now was I felt a need for the majority of coaches to get away from putting their hands on athletes. I just didn't, not that I was doing that a ton, but putting your hands on people was always a cognition of mine, like very limited situations. And then even like having athletes touch themselves. So like an RPR level 1, they're digging into themselves. And there's a little bit of weirdness there if it's not executed right, and it's not taught right. So I wanted to like remove that necessary, even though there's a big value there. And I can get back to that RPR, what we did with cross country and Rogers. But anyway, so the big ones for us is palm to forehead. So if palm to forehead is the vestibulocoelic reflex. If I have an immovable hand position here, I always cue to use the bony part of the base of the hand and put it into the bony part of the front of the skull. It is an overcoming isometric. So if this was a wall, I could do it on the wall. We used to, but this is, again, something you can do in place. My stuff was all about making it simpler to be able to be actionable for anyone. So palm to forehead is keeping a neutral head, putting the palm right there, bone on bone, and then pushing into this immovable object as hard as you can, bone on bone. So I got this forward moving head position. This is a flexion based practice. I'm pushing. That VCR is basically going to globally impact all flexors. So, like when I explain to wrestling, I get down in like this fetal position. I go, this is flexion. Like this is the image of flexion, and then like extension is me as tall and as big as I can be. These are the things we're trying to impact. And I said, in wrestling, like we could be in a flexion or extension position at basically any joint in the human body at any time based on what we or our partner that we're wrestling wants to do with us. So this is my favorite input of all time. Palm to forehead, do something, palm to forehead test. I say, I put everybody in a sprinter stance because of the gait aspect. So I don't stand bilaterally and just push. So I go split stance like a wide receiver. Simple way to get kids to stand like that. Palm to forehead, 5 seconds, bone on bone, push as hard as you can. Ready, go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Good. Retouch your toes. See where you're at. Oh my gosh, coach, I can't believe it. So that was impacting flexion. So deeper in my squat, better on my jump, more force into the ground out of hip flexion, punching down. Like those are the things that I think that whole chain is impacted by. So most men or males experience really, really beneficial results after that for whatever reason. Females and certain middle-aged men, like, so the older the guy, the more extensibility seems to be the issue. So I target extensibility through a trust fall, or with wrestling. So there's two. I'm not trying to confuse everyone here, but trust fall is the biggest bang for buck, and I can explain the rationale behind that. But with wrestling the other day, laced my hands together, so I have the bony parts of both. I want to hit the mirroring part of the head that I did on the front. I'm going to keep the head neutral, put the palms against the back of the head. 5-second isometric overcoming. You can use a wall. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Extension, opposite of the forward facing one. And then retest the toe touch. The trust fall does the same thing.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Hold on. Before you go into the trust fall, what you just did, you had your hands behind your head, laced if somebody's listening to it, pushing on the back of the skull in an isometric. My question for that is, before we get too far away, is I have bad headaches. I get migraines, and it's something I've noticed as I've gotten older. The ocular nerve is right there where you're pushing. So as you do that, do you see an increase in, or a change in vision as you come off of that isometric? See things more clear, see things a little bit different than maybe you did? And do you think that has something to do with athletic performance?
I've never associated those two with vision or looked at them immediately or had anyone really tell me that. But much of my deep dive in deep rabbit holes was always circled back to the 12th cranial nerves. I taught a class in Independence called Biomechanics of Sport, which was basically just like an opportunity to teach about all these systems. And so we would explicitly look at the ocular system, and we would look at the impact of those nerves and what movements created those things. But specifically with the extension release, I have never looked at that from that standpoint. But again, open to investigation for sure.
I noticed it through tempering because I had to find a way to get relief from some of those headaches. So I would have to roll myself out, but I would roll that out. And then I noticed when I stood up, I just saw different. So it was almost like going from an old TV we had when we were kids to something like we have now, and the clarity. That's when I started noticing the difference. And then as I got to researching, I'm like, well, wait a second. If you've got tightness going up the back of your neck, your ocular nerve could be impaired. And you getting that to loosen, well, now all of a sudden some clarity is introduced. And maybe that had something to do with it. But
for sure,
I didn't mean to get down that rabbit hole. I just saw that, and I wanted to ask. So
I mean, like if you're in a place of need, like you're talking about migraines, I had a back issue. Like if you there are so many nuggets within the cranial nerves and the impacts and the places that they go that I don't think the average practitioner is interested in, because I think, if I'm being honest, I think that there's no money in providing a absolute solution right away. I really just think nobody wants to talk about that, but I think that's the reason why. So the fact that you're talking about tempering to release migraine headaches, like when was the last time you went to a doctor and they put you in a tempering situation, like, or whatever. So I would say if someone's in need, to actually start there, because again, why some of my stuff works is the sensory systems are impacting the way we move and we feel so much, more than if you isolated it down to a muscle or a joint. Like, yeah, my knee hurts. Okay. But your perception of the reality is not great through your vision or your vestibular system. And if you change that, it may impact the way that the knee feels. So, yeah. So it's crazy, man. And that's the thing. Like when you're in a need situation, like dive in and solve your problem. But when you're training large groups of athletes, identify the big major changers and roll with it and use that. So flexion, extension. If I shot a bullet hole through my forehead and I had it come out the back at the top, that would be where I want to apply the pressure up on the top part. Not the top of the head. You have to tell athletes, not the top of the head, but the highest point on the back of the head. So I don't use that one for extension as much. I just thought for wrestling, like waiting for your next match, like boom, boom, I could do that way faster. And they are an extremely intent driven group. Like, so I knew that we could get that spot by doing that. The other way that I target extension is through a trust fall. People are sitting here like, holy cow, like, what is this dude talking about? But I'm telling you, so again, it's a very specific process that you have to do. So I put first of all, if you got to catch your buddy and you're giggling and laughing before it and you get to do it with somebody that you know, like there's this release of endorphins, there's this like excitement, like, so like there's this other side of it that's unintentional but observed. Like it came from it. But a trust fall. So partner that's receiving me in the trust fall is going to drop to a single knee or like a split stance lunge position. He's going to be on the ground, so he has the most stability. He's going to have two hands out, like from his chest, like he's extended on a bench press. He's going to let the athlete fall backwards towards him to a high hand catch and then lower him back to his chest and then push him away. So it's like an introduction to the fall. You don't want to have them just fall totally trusting on the first one. You have to kind of build it. So anywhere from 2 to 3 reps of this into another test will show you some things. So trust fall 1, catch high, lower, push. Trust fall 2, let them fall further towards your chest as the catcher and catch with 2 hands. Push back. And the third one, really let them come to you. If you feel like you can control them after the first 2, come all the way into the chest on the fall and then get them back up. The further they fall, the more that their brain perceives the fall, the more bang for your buck you're going to get out of it. This is like the stumble reflex. Let me explain what's going on here. So another deep rabbit hole is the baby reflex chart. If you find that and you start messing with that, again, that's maybe for those in need, that's another place that I would go. But stumble or startle. So as I fall, what engages in the system globally if you look at it? Well, it's things that are anterior. And reciprocal innervation says that anything that contracts like a bicep, then the tricep must relax. So if you view it as anterior contraction to try to keep me from falling, to hold me up, produces relaxation on the posterior, and the posterior houses a lot of the extension things. That's where that comes from. So 2, 3 trust falls, toe touch. That's usually what we do. That's what I like. Again, sport specific. Football, we have a helmet on. We can do the trust fall all day long. Wrestling has, the headgear on, so they have access to the back of the head and less time maybe before the match to do those things. So for me, the palm to forehead, trust fall. Those are my first 2. And then some visual inputs. So I've talked about it in my Simply Faster article, but just the simplistic nature of the pencil push-up. So single index finger or item straight out from the nose, arm fully extended, and then tracking back to the nose until I feel like I'm going to go cross-eyed, or I do, and then slowly tracking back out. Following the point of the finger to the nose 5 times is a convergence, which is flexion, divergence, which is extension. So a flexion and extension through the visual system. So getting a good wide range of those movements, and then testing again. So that's the pencil push-up. So those are kind of the big 3 for me. Those are the ones that have the biggest impact. You start watching eyes move and it gets really creepy. There's a lot of really built up compensations that are exposed through the eye movements, but that's the rabbit hole side. Just the straight application. Those are my big three. I'll share one other visual one. Again, I'm not trying to confuse. I'm trying to simplify here. So palm to forehead, trust fall, pencil push up. Okay, those are the three big ones that I would add at the very beginning of the section. One more visual one. What we did with wrestling the other day was I told them this would be a good assessment of their nervous system prior to a match. So a saccade is a rapid eye movement between 2 points. So we went left, right, and then we went up and down between the 2 points. So 2 fingers. We actually did it with a partner, so the partner could put the fingers out and watch the individual move the eyes. But if I perform a saccade back and forth between 2 points and the movement is not great, meaning not super fast, like it's clunky, my nervous system's probably not really where it needs to be. Like, I'm not saying that rapid eye movement is associated with elite athletes. You could be some lady lives across the street that can do it super fast and be couch bound, but probably not, honestly. But I'm just saying, like, from an assessment, a quick assessment individually athletically, like if I perform a saccade, like when you get good at it and you start to realize like that's not very fast, and I come in here and I double tragus squeeze and I perform it again, and I keep doing that until it's faster, then I'm ramping up the nervous system. So I told the wrestlers, if the nervous system is high and functioning with good sleep, good rest, good training, good nutrition, which is tough in wrestling sometimes, but if I have all those things maximized and I'm at 10, like sometimes you walk in at a 7 or a 6 or a 5, and you're not going to get to a 10. But if I could assess the nervous system, and let's just say I'm at a 6 based on that eye movement, it's slower than it normally is, and I can clear that out with square one and do it again and get it to go faster, like I've just ramped myself up a little bit. So that's the way we used that the other day. So one more thing that I want to go back to with the flexibility, and this is a big changer. So seriously, so recap again: palm to forehead, trust fall, pencil push up. If you still have somebody not going to the distance they want or whatever, you have somebody still stuck. Reach as far as you can, toe touch, come up, double tragus squeeze, reach down again, come up, double tragus squeeze, reach down again. They're just going to keep going farther. Come up, double tragus squeeze, reach down again, go up, double tragus squeeze, boom. And their minds get blown. You could literally start with that. Like, again, you can pick one of these things and just do them if you want. It doesn't matter, but you're going to see a big impact. So the way that I see the tragus is like a reset button. So what's going on here is the vagus nerve is coming down through that piece. This particular part of the vestibular system and the vagus nerve can impact the parasympathetic at like 75% of those nerves ending in that region. So the vagus nerve with parasympathetic drive comes down through there, wraps through all the vital organs, and ends, the longest one of the 12 cranial nerves, ends in the diaphragm area. So when I belly breathe, I stimulate parasympathetic activation. And when I double squeeze, I am stimulating parasympathetic. So wrestling example, since we've talked about that today, I said, when would you need to come back to the middle? Like, and I got this kid from Kingsville. It's awesome, super engaged. He like understood, like, when I do something really, really well, when I'm like near pin and then the time runs out and I feel good about myself, I need to like come back to center. And also when I like do something terrible, like on the inverse of that, like it's both gets me back to like a reset. So if I get too confident or too low, like if I can just reset and use some breathing techniques to get back into that as well, because of that diaphragmatic impact on the vagus nerve, I can use that in match. So good things, bad things, it's great to reset because it doesn't take a lot of energy or effort. And I tell kids that might think it's weird. No one's going to know what you're doing. Dude, I do this stuff all the time. Like, I was playing old man basketball the other night, and it's just like when I set out, I was like double ear squeeze, like just to like I'm fatigued, I'm out of shape, but like it's okay. Like tell yourself like it's going to be okay through the vagus nerve. You're not just like psychologically doing that to yourself. So um again, example after example. Stud hurdler, best hurdler in the state of Arkansas last year, false start in a race, regardless if it was him or somebody else, stood up, double ear squeeze, palm to forehead, backed in the blocks. Like it's just when you see the impact it has and you're a high level performer, you can input that stuff to help yourself. So we had a double rule in Arkansas. So if there's a false start, the whole field reset again, and everybody was with one now. And if so, if you false start, you're out. So Bruce would do a great job of like resetting himself back down, potentiating something that he found value in with the flexion release, and then going back to his race. So those are the big ones. I don't think you always have to do, I will say this, I don't think you always have to do pencil push-ups. Palm to forehead, trust fall, double tragus squeeze, and you're ready to go. Go right into your dynamic warm-up, go right into your ground-based warm-up. If you're crazy, I guess, and you want to just go right to the activity, go right to the activity. Like I believe that. I could stand behind that slightly. Um so
Taking what you're saying there and taking it back to some things I do understand and I do know, you're touching on sports psychology very hard. I know like the Olympians and stuff like that, they have a physical thing they do, whether they get too high or too low. Let's say I talked to Christy Ambrosi, and she's the one that got me down this path. If you're playing in a softball game, you have an error. You have a physical trigger that you need to do to flush that mistake or that success to get ready for the next play, whether it be restrapping your glove, whether it be making a line in the, in the clay and getting it wiped out. Yes, you're doing something that's a little bit more neurological, but the idea is the same, that moment's gone, recenter, refocus, and let's move into the next.
sure. Yeah, I look at psychological and physiological or neurological on the physio side, like their relationship is symbiotic. However, absent of the other, like they're not going to be the best that they could possibly be. Um, so yeah, so that's the confidence in the execution of some of those neurological things comes from the experiences gained in the training or how you feel as a result of those activities. So I think if you just showed up as a coach or a practitioner and you just started throwing things at people without, I could tell you it's the vestibulocholic reflex. That doesn't mean anything to you. I could say like it's going to help flexion. It still may not mean anything to you. You'd be amazed how many kids don't know the difference between flexion and extension at a particular joint angle. So, like you got to be able to show them anything. And that's the mistake with RPR too, a little bit that people make. It's just like, we were doing that here before in Lone Jack, but like it was just from the YouTube course. And so there was no understanding of the why and how to implement it. I would say with RPR with RPR, if I can just finish kind of with this idea on this neurological stuff. The big thing for me is with our groups last year. So we'll go back to that sprint jumps throws group with the pre-warm-up process. So palm to forehead, trust fall, double tragus squeeze. Just prior to that, we would do 3. If it was a real sprint intensive day, which most of them would be, or lower body with that group, we would do psoas. So if you look at RPR level 1, we do psoas, glute, hamstring. That takes 15 seconds every single time. Why not? It took 15 seconds. If you do it right, you're going to see a big impact. So I did that with sprinters, jumpers, and throwers. If we were bilaterally pressing anything, I would do lat, rotator cuff, and shoulder. I think that's the way they classify them. So lat, shoulder, and rotator cuff, saw the arm off. Those 3 prior to the press. In my own training, what I will do, like in between sets of bench, is I will keep hitting that lat spot. Like I will keep going back to that because I feel like that's the biggest thing for me to engage on the press. So I took I don't know, 15, 16 spots from RPR, and in the masses, I just refined it down to what's most essential and what's most impactful for those movements. So again, I would add psoas, glute, flexion, extension, and hamstring, large impact in sprinting and moving and jumping. I would add those for lower body stuff. And if I was doing anything upper body, like throwing the javelin or bench pressing or something like that, or a baseball, I would add those other three. I would just lock in that muscular system around those movements, and go from there. So those are the only additional things in my neurological like mass practice that I would add to the front. So if I'm looking at my sprint jump screw 15 seconds, so as glute hamstring, palm to forehead 5 seconds, crust fall takes a little bit longer, but you're getting a lot of giggles and a lot of laughs and excitement. So you do 3 of those, that's 30 seconds. We're now at like 50 seconds, double ear squeeze, boom, forward skip with arm circle. We're going, baby. Like it's just, and again, what if some kid doesn't do it, doesn't give intent? Okay, fine. Like he's still going to go through the dynamic warm up. We're good. Like it does. I mean, at the end of the day, but if implemented well, I think you're going to see a lot of buy-in from kids and people like yourself and many of the people that listen to this podcast. Like if they can kind of either visualize if there's video, or if they can understand kind of where I'm coming from, or if they want to reach out and ask me questions, I'm happy to kind of showcase that. Simply Faster article, I think, has a good couple of videos in it that show a few of those things. But when you're a practitioner and a student and a person that has a lot of ways to track data, you're going to have some fun with some of those things, just implementing them into your practices that you already have and seeing how it impacts performance. That's the stuff that matters. So
At the end of the day, we're all trying for the same thing, and to have our athletes as prepared as possible by whatever means is necessary with, so if people can take something from this and get an athlete just a little bit better, well, yeah, it's well worth the utilization.
sure. One of the things that Dan Fichter said to me, that kind of got me interested. When you look at like we're track guys to an extent, both of us, I think. So when you look at like, and people understand this, when you look at the 100, like what's the difference between 9.9 and 10.0? Like 9.99 and 10.0? Like what is the difference between 0.01 and the 100-meter dash? And Dan was like, I think it could be some of this stuff. Like I think it could be these things. And when you get to that level and you're looking for that 1%, half percent, 0.01% improvement, like so, you've got a pretty good group of guys in your gym that are focused on being the best they can possibly be. If that stuff helps them, and you can, because when people want to be great, they're willing to go after that stuff with a little more intent. So I'm excited to see how it goes for people.
Yeah, some of this stuff, we jump a lot. It only takes a second to press on the forehead. I'm willing to try it. I've had some luck with some things. Not had some luck with some others, and I'm kind of like you. How far am I willing to go down this rabbit hole and sacrifice something else that has been productive for me? So I think that's the balance everybody has to find.
Sure.
Well, Coach, I know you got a full day ahead. Chiefs play a little bit later on.
Yeah.
I know we'll be running into each other more, and then as throws start taking off this summer or this later on this spring, I'm going to have to get some guys up there and see if you can pick up my mistakes, and we'll work together on some athletes, hopefully.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, I'm excited to get down to your gym soon. And I've got a basement gym here that I'm pretty proud of and building every single day. So we'll have to come in and do some stuff together for sure. So I appreciate it.
You'll be completely underwhelmed, I assure you. But the one thing I noticed through this, and I got to apologize, I don't know how much you heard it. I'm such a nerd, but when I study, I always like turn on Ancient Aliens or something like that in the background, and I just forget about it. So we did half this interview with Ancient Aliens playing behind you, and I don't know if you heard it, but
Not a single time.
I've learned to tune it out, and it just kills the background noise. And then, so if you heard that, I am incredibly sorry, Coach. That's just my daily norm.
Yeah, I did not. That's funny.
Okay, well, good deal. As the season progresses, I'm sure we'll be around each other, and I know I have some more questions that we didn't get to, and we'll see how that shakes out.
Absolutely. Thank you, Coach. I appreciate you.
All right, man. You have a wonderful day. Thank you.
You as well. Thanks.